In our readings for these videos on 2 Peter chapter 2, the tenor of the verses might call into question the title that I gave this series of precious promises. Perhaps a better title would be Powerful Principles that will help us live in a way that is pleasing to the Lord. Anyway, today we're going to read from verse 10 to the first half of verse 13. But chiefly them that walk after the flesh in the lust of uncleanness, and despise government. Presumptuous are they, self-willed, they are not afraid to speak evil of dignities. Whereas angels, which are greater in power and might, bring not railing accusation against them before the Lord. But these, as natural brute beasts, made to be taken and destroyed, speak evil of the things that they understand not, and shall utterly perish in their own corruption, and shall receive the reward of unrighteousness, as they that count it pleasure to riot in the daytime. Recently in my work, I received an email about a bridge across a river where some teenagers had climbed across the parapet and were daring one another to jump between the external supports. We were being criticized for doing nothing to stop this. So after due consideration, we made adjustments to the bridge to make it considerably more difficult to climb over the parapet. Within a few weeks, I'm sure you've already guessed, we received another email criticizing us for ruining the aesthetics of the bridge. In the West, criticism of the government is the order of the day, and just about everyone seems to do it, no matter what you try to do. Peter has something to say on this subject. For example, in verse 10, he writes about those who despise government and are not afraid to speak evil of dignities. In verse 12, of those who speak evil of the things that they understand not as well. In contrast, he highlights angels who bring not railing accusation against them. This critical and disparaging spirit is not cast in a good light at all, and Peter uses the example of angels to show just how out of step it is with a godly spirit. The angels which are greater in power and might, verse 11. In other words, those who might be thought of as having a right of criticism or the ability to do so, they do not conduct themselves in such a way against duly constituted authority. It is an example for Christians to follow. Ungodly men are here compared in verse 4 to the angels who sinned, who arrogate to themselves the authority of determining what is right and wrong, just as Adam did in Genesis chapter 3. In contrast, godly people should be like the angels that we've read about in verse 11, acting as, Peter writes, before the Lord. I feel that this is a particularly important lesson for me to learn, because criticism can come so easily to my mind, and perhaps to yours as well. In Romans 13 verse 1, Paul instructs us to be subject unto the higher powers. It reminds the believers that whosoever resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, verse 2. He instructs Titus in chapter 3 verse 2 to speak evil of no man. And this fits well with what James writes, speak not evil one of another. Chapter 4 verse 11 of his letter. They went on to challenge us in the following verse with the question, who art thou that judgest another? Peter's already written in his first letter about laying aside all malice and all guile and all evil speakings. Chapter 2 verse 1. That's something that we ought to lay aside too. Rather than criticizing the powers that be, we could do better by praying for them. Paul writes in 1 Timothy 2 about praying for all men, for kings, and for all that are in authority. And that would certainly be a far better use of our breath.